he was like, find me a girl or something like that. And then they were like, well, there's a girl right inside.
I told Jaspreet that she was going to marry me.
And I thought that was so arrogant. I left there thinking, who does this guy think he is?
If it was second date.
It was, I swear.
Second date.
It was a second date.
We're obsessed in our culture with marriage. We've got this obsessive idea that when we have kids, the only priority in life we've got now is to get them married. I'm a fluent Panjabi speaker. I don't know how to say neurodiversity in Punjabi. I would never in my wildest dreams have believed that cancer would strike our family in that way, because somebody else always gets cancer. This ridiculous stigma that in a woman, if it's ovarian cancer, oh God, we can't talk about ovaries.
As we all know, life never works out, and we can always plan and we can always have but
much more open-minded to things like therapy, and I did have therapy. For me, it was a big thing. I know there's still a stigma around that, especially Asian men. If you're under Great Ormond Street's care, you know that you're in the best care in the world.
Yes.
It's world famous as a children's hospital. But on the flip side, if you're under Great Ormond Street's care, you know something serious is wrong you do to a child. Sometimes you just need to hear from people that have walked a similar path.
Of course.
And, have come out on the other end okay-ish, because it makes you realise that there is a light.
Hope.
There is hope, absolutely.
Yeah. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Sicking podcast. This podcast is brought to you by the Sicking app. So this is an app that's designed to support single Sikhs looking for meaningful connection and love. For introductions, so I am Kiran, a former medic turned healthcare consultant. In my spare time, I do seva and write poetry, but enough about me. We're here today because we are joined by the phenomenal couple, Amit and Jaspreet.
Hi, I'm Amit Kali, former deputy head teacher and founder of For Working Parents and co-founder of Mixala, also dad to 3 young children.
Hi, I'm Jaspreet Kali, co-founder of Mixala. We take the Indian spices that you get in a traditional chai and we blend it with more westernized flavors.
If I could just start by asking you a bit about your journey with meeting Jaspreet.
Yeah, so we were introduced. We'd known about each other for a long time because of the family connections. But I guess we met properly, I'm going to say 2015. Jaspreet had only been living in the country for a couple of years at that stage. She's from Tanzania. And we were introduced by family, yeah.
We met at a barbecue. It was my mussi's barbecue. There and then they started teasing us a little bit. My mussie sort of followed up a little later. Even then I was like, no. She was like, don't be silly. He's a really nice guy. Why are you even saying no before even...
What have you got to lose?
What have you got to lose? Having at least a date or meeting him. When we met at the barbecue, it was very much, like you say, coincidence, so they call it kismet in our thing. He had a wedding where my mussie was. My mussie's married to his first cousin. He popped in, so he's all like suited up and everything, and he's popped in after the wedding.
Intentional popping?
No, coincidence.
It's coincidence.
Absolute coincidence. I think my muster was there, the other one, and they were just like, oh, he was just like, find me a girl or something like that. And then they were like, well, there's a girl right inside. And I think that's where they started when my master was like, yeah, there's one right inside, and they were like, and started teasing us, a little bit together. And I remember my Masi coming in, I was helping her washing the dishes, and she was like, well, they're talking about Amit and you. I was like, no, that's not possible. And, I was just like, yeah, whatever. Yeah, I was just like, it's fine. His cousin called his mum up to say that, if there is a girl.
Yeah, I'm just, as you were speaking, just trying to remember back to that barbecue.
Yeah.
It was, I had a wedding and then came back to the house, and from my perspective, we were just talking, I think, flippantly, because it's my cousin's house, right? So we were just talking very flippantly. Jaspreet happened to be there, and I think her version of it. I mean, I was in a suit, I was at a wedding, so I think she maybe took a fun look, and the rest is history, as they say, But we might have both felt that it was just people talking, and whatever. The next day it'd be back to normal. But I think the next day I reached out and just said, look, they sort of recommended that we have a conversation. Why not? Let's have a conversation. Who knows? It may go nowhere, but it could lead somewhere. So we just took it from there.
We met, out for dinner. We did that once, and then I think the second time we met, it was a bit rushed. I think he was coming from work and I was coming from work, and I remember him after the second one, asking me, sort of, where are we going with this? And like I said, I panicked.
I don't know if it was second date.
I swear it was a second date. It was a second date. And I sort of panicked, and I just thought, gosh, he wants an answer now. I remember telling my Masi, he wants an answer now. I can't give. And I was thinking, oh my God, I think he's way ahead of me. I remember messaging him back saying that, I don't think this is for us. Yeah. And then I remember him back saying, okay, that's fine. And we sort of, just left it at that. And then
And what was going through your mind when you got that response?
I think at the time I was pretty angry.
Really?
Yeah, I think so. I'm pretty sure I remember being angry. I'm thinking, but maybe, just think as Jaspreet's talking about it now, maybe second date to ask that question is a bit much. But I think I was at the stage in life, you know, we get these family pressures, don't we? And you just think, gosh,
His family asked, don't they?
exactly. So you just think, let's get on with it. And I'm not saying that's the right thing. That's definitely not the right thing. But maybe I asked that question as to, you know, I probably meant, you know, should we carry on seeing each other with a view that if things work out, we may well end up getting married. And so maybe I put that sort of pressure on. And obviously, because I know her now,
Exactly.
I know exactly what would be going through her mind at that time. But at the time, I didn't know her. So
Getting to know each other.
I mean, I know him now, so because I know now, and I can so imagine that he would be the kind of person who can ask that question. But again, it was my mussy who she met him at an event, and he was like, yeah, but she's not interested. She's like, no, but, you know, she's like that. Don't worry. You know, you just keep
being persistent.
Keep being persistent.
Yeah.
But yes, and then we just got talking again. And then we went it wasn't much. It was like a month or two gap. And then we, you know, went again on another date. And that's when it sort of really then, you know, was like, okay, no, we do like each other's company.
Prior to this, had you explored other avenues? I know Goodwire matrimonial services, but, you know, online, meeting people in person. Yeah. What was that journey before?
I was quite skeptical, I'll be very honest. So this is obviously going back maybe 10 years ago. So obviously it wasn't as you know, we are today. Maybe I wouldn't have been. But at that time, I was very skeptical of, you know, trying out apps. There weren't many sort of at that time. I remember my dad, sometimes I'd be randomly sitting at work and I'd get a message from him saying, check this guy out. He's telling me like bio data. He'd have the photo on it because I'd know the name. Then, you know, at that time, Instagram was not much, but Facebook, quickly checking Facebook.
Yeah, Facebook chat.
You know, Facebook sometimes, you know, you could check the profile out. I remember once, I think he'd send me 2 or 3 and I kept on saying, nah, I just said no. And he was like, if you're going to keep on saying no to every guy, you're not going to find anybody. You're not going to be finding. You can't. Yes, you're too picky. And, you know, I had all of that. And then I started thinking, you know, when they double thinking, I was like, am I being too, you know.
You have that though, don't you?
Yeah.
Check yourself. It must have been such a culture shock coming from Tanzania and moving to...
It really was. Coming from Tanzania, you know, people who sort of come from there will understand we're a very close-knit community. Everybody knows everybody. When I came here, it was a massive, massive culture shock. Schooling was a shock, you know, when I saw the girls in school. I mean, I'd never worn makeup before and I came to school and I was in A-levels and there was girls, you know, wearing makeup to school. I had a backpack with me because that's how I was used to it. And there were girls carrying handbags with the files in their hand.
Glamorized.
Yeah, very much so. And I found it quite hard to fit in, I'll be very honest. And I think the sort of friends I had, because when you sort of come into A-levels, you get like, you know, students coming in from other schools. And they're very much so other children who were, you know, had just moved into the country and, you know, were kind of finding their place, as opposed to I didn't fit into the groups who'd sort of been with each other since year 7 up. And then I got exposed to the whole atmosphere of uni, you know, living on your own, you're exposed to going out and you're exposed to all this happening. And I think at the back of my mind, sort of, I've always been very conservative. Like I've not sort of been that kind of person who sort of, you know, just wants to put herself out there, experiment and sort of all of that. And a lot of East Africa stayed in me. I always wanted to find a guy, you know, who sort of understood where I came from, you know, had sort of been there. My values, maybe like me, had moved, you know, had sort of spent their childhood there, but moved. Also funny, and you're British from East. Every time you'd sort of, you know, meet a guy and you'd be like, oh yes, my parents are from, you know, Kenya or Tanzania, and you'd be like, oh, you know, really exciting. But I think I'd narrowed myself quite a lot in those younger years, and I'd kind of shut off quite a lot of, you know, it doesn't mean that, you know, there are no other guys out there who are equally nice or, you know.
Yeah.
But I think that was my perspective. And now when I look back, as we all do when you look back, you know, I thought maybe I could have been a bit more open-minded. Yeah. In those younger years, maybe I would have, you know, met, you know, other people. But because I was quite conservative and I sort of then just, you know, sort of carried on. And then I got into my sort of, you know, you're 23, 24 age where your parents are like, okay, now you need to start finding somebody. You haven't found somebody. And then it got hard. Right. Because obviously past uni where you're exposed to sort of a lot of
where
people.
You're meeting people. Exactly.
Yes. And now it's like either you get introduced by somebody, you know, with somebody, or you go out yourself. You find somebody at work, or you actually find somebody, you know, while you're out somewhere, or a friend or something like that, you know. And that was hard because I you know, I didn't go out much. And I did. When it came to that stage, I think I opened myself up. I think there's also, you know, culturally, like how we come, like, so my dad wears a bug, my brother wears a bug, you know, everyone in my family, you know, generally, mostly all wear a bug. You get asked, like, do you want a bug walla? Do you want, you know, non-bug? Yes, it is. And obviously my preference used to always be like, it wasn't a deal breaker, don't get me wrong, it wasn't a deal breaker. But obviously the preference was I would like somebody, you know, who initially wears a bug and all that. But yeah, and then I started opening myself up, started thinking that, okay, you get a few rishte, somebody says, oh, we've got this person or got that person, you start texting each other and then maybe go on one date and you think, no, that's not quite working. And then obviously through family, I got introduced to Amit, but it was more like get introduced, but we sort of took our time.
And what was your perceptions of kind of British Sikh men or Asian men? Because you'd come from Tanzania. Did you have any idea of what it would be like, and what would the early dating stages with Amit like?
Yeah, I think I did have a perception, to be honest, because sort of all the sort of West London kind of guys. You've got like earrings or all of that, and I did. As you said, you mentioned before, rude boys. It is true.
Early 2000s.
Yes, exactly. The look. Yes, yeah. The gelled hair, the spikes, and
the slit in the eye.
Yeah. Sort of all of that, and I don't know how to particularly put it, but maybe not as sort of conservative as sort of where we come from. Where it's like prim and sort of proper and sort of all of that.
A bit rough around the edges.
Yeah, but rough around the edges. I think my experience with Amit was a bit different because we were quite older when we met. So, I think we met when he was 28. So he was sort of, it wasn't, sort of 21, 22-year-old. Yeah, he's probably gone through those phases and, sort of all of that. So the fact that he'd been to Tanzania a few times and sort of knew, sort of how the culture was important. But yeah, I think, it sort of opened me up to thinking that actually, it doesn't have to be somebody, who's from there.
Yeah.
You don't have to be, it's literally, who you get along with.
Yeah. So when you're getting to know people, you try and figure out the kind of value systems where it aligns and possibly where it doesn't, and how you navigate those conversations.
Yeah, I think values is a really big one. And I think, despite the fact that we might all be from the same kind of Sikh faith, people who come from different countries have different upbringings and different cultural, values. A Sikh from India might have different values to a Sikh from Malaysia, to Tanzania, Kenya, UK, wherever it might be. So I think there was, Jasprit had her own upbringing and her own kind of cultural identity.
Of course, yeah.
But it aligned quite nicely with mine, because although I'm a British-born Sikh, my background is also Tanzanian. My mum was born and raised in Tanzania.
Okay.
My dad is born in Tanzania. My boy lives in Tanzania. So I'd been going to Tanzania a lot.
So you've got that familiar.
Yeah. So I'd been visiting the country a lot, and identify very closely with it. So appreciated some of the cultural things that I guess Jasprit was bringing to the relationship. On the flip side, obviously, I'm born in the UK, so I'm very much British cultured as well, and very much kind of that sort of British way of thinking, which I think Jasprit might have seen as a little bit of a drawback initially. I think there might be that stigma that some of us British Sikhs perhaps carry, and maybe she found that a little bit difficult at the beginning. But I think once we got to know each other and once we understood, and then, goodness me, we started pulling out so many family and friend connections that we knew from either Tanzania or from here.
In terms of stigma around dating, British Sikh or British boys, given that she was from Tanzania, what do you mean by that? Yeah.
I don't know. I think there might be a little bit of a stigma amongst certain people that, British Sikhs or British Indians, have a bit of an attitude, and, that kind of, depending on where you're from as well, that sort of rude boy kind of thing about you. And I think it puts some people off. They just see it as kind of, again, going back to the values thing, it doesn't align with certain people's values. I mean, I don't think I was ever a rude boy or anything like that. I don't know. But we're brought up in the UK. We're trying to marry all these different kind of fusion of cultures together, whether we have Indian background, East African background, any other kind of background. And we're trying to marry that with the fact that we're born into a British society, raised in sort of, British culture, raised with people in this country from various backgrounds. And, we're influenced by all of that. Yeah. That all influences who we are and how we behave and how we act towards certain things. And I think perhaps not coming from this country, there was that perception that, maybe all British Sikhs or all British Indians are just rude boys. I mean, I'm from East London originally, so that I think doesn't help. And then I live in Essex, which I also think doesn't help.
Well, yeah.
And so, it just creates that kind of perception of people.
Sure. And we all have biases too, right? So
we do. And I think it's hard when you're dating and when you first start dating to work through those biases can be quite difficult, because once you see immediately this guy is from East Ham, or this guy is from Southall, or this guy's from Ilford, or this guy's from Hayes, For some people, that's a big kind of, oh, no, not for me. No, thank you. And, there's no reason other than where that person's from for you to say no until you get to know that person. You suddenly realize, actually, this person might be perfect for me. So I think working through some of those initial biases that we have when we're dating, it can be hard. But I think if you're able to work through them and give people an opportunity and a chance, they need to know the person who they are.
Even my friends and I, we're in that demographic where we're looking, and I think we have this perception of things. And I check myself now when I have these biases of, okay, don't do that, and get to know somebody. And I think it's the same, for men looking to date women. Being British, but then having the African roots and seeing all of these parts of your identity, which are really important representation matters. But how do you navigate that?
For me, it's I've got lots of different facets of my identity. We're not singular in terms of who we are and what our background is. And I think that's why it's sometimes quite difficult to explain to somebody who is, English back to the 1300s or whatever it might be, what that identity is. So for me, incredibly proud of being British and, being raised in this country. But, it goes even beyond that. My identity is also shaped by being an East Londoner because, we get into little rivalries with West Londoners.
So
you got that identity piece. The Essex piece is a part of my identity. Tanzania is a very important part of my identity as well because my mum and dad are both born there. My mum was raised there. I've been going there long before, we got married because my boy lives there. But I'm also very proud of being Indian as well. We've been going back to India since I was 10, 11 years old. We've got family there from my dad's side who we still go and see. So to be, very proud of all of these different kind of cultures can sometimes take a bit of, there's a lot there. But I guess I fly 3 flags, the UK flag, the Indian flag and the Tanzanian flag. Being a Singh, I guess, is part of all of that because, sometimes even within Sikhi, there's conflict and dispute around that whole political side of things that gets involved. There's the sort of rivalry between whether you're an African Singh or whether you're an Indian Singh, and we're very proud of being East African, and the East African community I think is very proud of being East African, and I think there might be a little stigma between those two communities that actually East African think they're a bit above the sort of Indians. Indians think we're the authentic and we're the true, and you're frauds and your paga too small and. So there's that whole kind of...
Considering you were a pug, you were always a pugwala. You were a pug when you were 16 years old.
Yeah, true. Yeah, so I wasn't a Singh by
birth.
My father's a Monna.
So at what age?
I was 16.
And what drove that in?
I have no idea.
Yeah.
I have no idea. I think I was getting a bit more interested in Sikhi at that time. I mean, I'm not a massively religious person, but I think at that time I was getting a bit more interested. And my dada was a pagwala, my nana was a pagwala. A lot of people in my family were. One of my cousins started to grow his hair and became a pagwala, and I just sort of felt a bit of, again, that identity piece.
Yeah.
Identifying with the pug and felt that it was something that I wanted to do. And 16 started wearing it, and I haven't looked back since then. And there is that identity. I mean, there's nothing better when a pagwala sees another pagwala on the street, and there's just the Singh nod. I just feel so much pride in that, and I feel even more pride when I'm with non-Singhs, and they're like, "Do you know that guy?" No.
See, this is a phenomenon that I had to understand firsthand. But that's
I love it. They said to me, "Do you know that guy?" And I say, "No,
absolutely not."
So why are you nodding at him? I said, "Because he's my boy. He's my brother. That's it. He's just he's never Singh."
Yeah.
So
I left out or something.
So for me, that identity is shaped by so many of my kind of experiences. But I'm lucky that my family encouraged. I've been to India probably over 30 times in my life. I've been to Tanzania 15 times, so that kind of ability to explore those cultures and identities. Because you've got a lot of people in this country who are born in the UK, who are East African, but have never stepped foot on the continent of Africa, or who are, Indian, but have never been to Punjab.
What is your opinion on meeting people online, like an online platform? Even though I know you probably haven't used it, or, maybe before Justpreet, but...
I think they're great. I don't see anything wrong with them at all. I think if people are looking for genuine companionship and they're thinking they're of the age where they want to settle down and get married and those things, if an app is something that can help you, then we live in a tech era, we live in a social media era, we live in these are our times. Why wouldn't you use something that can facilitate a connection or at least an initial conversation? Obviously, it depends on the type of app, and there are obviously lots of other apps out there that are more I guess, sexualized and for different purposes. But if you're looking for sort of companionship and you're looking to settle down, then I don't see anything wrong with using an app. In fact, I've got people in my family and friend circle who have met through various apps. Success stories, and they're not afraid to say it. There may still be a stigma around meeting somebody online.
Yeah.
I think people might see it as, oh, what, you couldn't meet somebody in real life? What's wrong with you?
I do see that.
Yeah.
I see that a lot, where people won't tell people that they've met via an app or online, and they'll make a story up because there's a stigma still. And I think that's a shame, because it's a disservice to, we're just using another tool. It doesn't mean there's, any less of us. I want to talk a bit about kind of wedding planning and what that looked like for you. But I also want to hold space for grief and explore. I understand the loss of your late mother, and again, I'm sorry to hear this, but I think it's so important to talk about, and I think a lot of our listeners will resonate with this. So if you could just maybe walk us through that.
Sure. So Jasprit and I met in 2015. My mum was diagnosed with ovarian cancer at the start of 2016. So it's very early on in our relationships. Jasprit only ever really knows my mum as being somebody who was ill.
Right. Okay.
Doesn't know anything of her before that time, what she was like as a kind of fit and healthy person.
I still remember the time when he actually messaged me to tell me that, she's been diagnosed. I was waiting for a train, and I was sitting on the bench, and I read it, and I would type something and then I'd delete it. And it took me ages to send him a reply, because I thought, what do I say? Do I say, yes, I'm here for you, or it's going to be all right? I don't even know if it's going to be all right. I don't know.
So real, though.
Yeah, and it's so difficult when you don't know somebody. Now I know somebody. If I'd known it now I know exactly what to say to him, because I know what he wants to hear. But at that time, I didn't know what he wanted to hear. Yeah, and I was just like, I remember just saying stuff like, I'm here for you, and, if you want to, if you haven't have a chat, or if you want to meet up, then and we'll take it from there. And that was literally, we'd only had like 2-3 dates in. And so that happened.
I mean, we didn't decide to get married until, I think, sort of middle of late 2016 into 2017 is when we sort of decided to get married. So by that stage, my mum was already battling ovarian cancer. So trying to plan a wedding, whilst also, from my point of view, also making sure that I was there for my mum as much as I could be. And I think from my mum's point of view, I'm an only child. So she struggled to conceive after me. All of this seems to be interlinked. She had problems, I think, her ovaries and her womb after she'd given birth to me. Had they known at the time, she could have had removed, and maybe that cancer wouldn't have appeared. But listen, hindsight's wonderful, right? So we were trying to plan an entire wedding. My mum was obviously a typical Indian mum, Sikh mum, Panjabi mum. She wanted to see her son get married. It was a big deal for her. And so trying to plan that wedding was very stressful, because we had the added dimension of Jasprit's parents being in Tanzania.
Yeah.
And obviously traditionally weddings are held where the girl is from.
And I think for my dad, he always wanted a daughter. And ever since I've born, he had envisioned this dream of how he wanted my wedding to go. That's all he's known ever since. And he was very vocal about it. Like, me growing up, he'd always be like, when you get married, we're going to do this. I want you coming down from your room. Yeah, it was very, very, and it was very sort of emotional in that way. And obviously, as we all know, life never works out. And, we can always plan something. We can always have, but way life twists us and, sort of, and it didn't quite work in that way. And I think when it didn't, both families and emotions were very heightened, and we didn't know each other much at that time. Had we, you'd respond maybe different, have different conversations. And obviously, yes, when you look back, maybe things, could have been done a lot differently. But so there was those kind of, tension.
Yeah.
I'll be very honest. There was a time where I told him, it's too much for me. This is too intense. And if it's going to cause so much a rift between both families, I don't think, we should be going, we should be going ahead with this. And it was a very, very tough conversation. And I remember him being very, very calm. And he was like, no, don't worry about it. We both want this, and we'll find some sort of middle ground.
That's amazing. So you had that hope.
Yeah, very much so. And I remember, us having that really sort of like tough conversation. And then he was like, maybe we just take a little bit of time out. And we were meant to take I think the weekend. It was a Friday, and we were meant to take the weekend. And then Friday hadn't finished. I think it was about 11 o'clock at night. And then he just wrote me a message saying, by the way, I love you. And to be honest, that was a turning point for me, because I thought, if this guy can, after all we're going through, still say that to me, and even before, like, we were meant to take the whole weekend, but we haven't even lasted the whole weekend yet. Oh. Then then that was the turning point for me to say that, actually, you know what? Yes, this is something that I want to fight for. We will find a way, because you do. And I think that's what happens in relationships. Sometimes, we give up too soon sometimes because things get hard.
Yeah, and your story is such a testament to sometimes it can be a choice.
It is, yes. And sometimes, don't get me wrong, it could be a right choice when, things are hard, and it's sometimes good to recognize that, maybe it's better to do it earlier than later. Mm-hmm. But I think other times, sometimes, maybe we give up a bit too easily. Maybe there could have been, you could have worked it out, or there could have been some solutions or something, and sometimes we give up too easily. But and sort of, we're here.
So any other day, it wouldn't have been an issue for us because we have family connections in Tanzania anyway, so it wouldn't have been a problem. But the issue then became that my mum wasn't going to be able to travel to the wedding in Tanzania. And so it became a bit of a sticking point in our families, because Jaspreet's parents were very sort of insistent on the fact that they want to do a wedding in Tanzania because they've got their own network of people for whom they want to throw a lavish kind of party and wedding for. And we were insistent that the wedding, or at least most of the wedding, the important parts need to be here in the UK, because I was never going to get married without my mum being there.
Of course, and you wanted her at these, events.
Yeah. And she wasn't going to travel to Tanzania. She wasn't going to be able to travel to Tanzania because she was having chemotherapy. She was, not always physically fit enough. She was going through things like she lost her hair, lost her weight, lost sense of taste and smell, and she was very conscious of all of those things. And so so that was a very stressful time. It put a lot of strain on Jaspreet and I, because I think she felt unable to challenge her parents on their views,
of course,
in terms of having the wedding in Arusha in Tanzania. And I felt unable to tell my mother that I was going to get married and she wouldn't be able to be there. So it was a real challenge.
I can imagine. And weddings are stressful, in itself. Within the South Asian community, there's this sense of having the perfect wedding with kind of location, everybody being there, navigating, as you mentioned, values and parents on one side, parents on the other. And how did you end up kind of resolving having the conversation with your mum, but then also Jaspreet having the conversation with her parents? How did you end up resolving it, and what was the outcome?
It was... We did find a resolution, but it was in the worst possible circumstances, because what had happened was Jaspreet's parents had come here for Christmas 2017, so right at the end of 2017. They were here in the country for Christmas, and my mum was very unwell at that stage. And we had decided then to bring, the wedding was going to be in August of 2018. Okay. And we had decided that we were going to do a small registry wedding, so that my mum could see the wedding at least. It was clear that she wasn't going to be around for very much longer. So we had decided that let's do a small registry wedding at the local town hall, that my mum can at least see her son get married. Whatever we do after that, we can discuss and decide and whatever. But let's at least get that done. Give her that moment to see her son get married. So we'd actually booked the town hall for the 6th of January. And, Jaspreet's parents were still going to be here. I was, my family were obviously all around. And we said that we'd book a registry wedding in the local town hall for the 6th of January. But my mum died on the 5th. She died on the morning of the 5th. Yeah, so she died at home. And it was the day before the wedding.
Well, that's so hard.
It was. And look, even as she had made that registry wedding, she was only present by that stage in body. Mm-hmm. There was nothing else. I mean, she was, pretty much unconscious for most of those last few weeks. So I don't know how much she would have seen or known.
Yeah.
But that was a sort of compromise that we reached. And then when she had passed, we stuck to the original plans for the wedding, which again is controversial because people would argue, how can you enjoy yourself when you've just lost somebody so close to you? And my point of view was, nobody needs to worry about that because she was my mother.
You would know best.
Exactly. She was my mother and she was my father's wife. So we're the only two people that need to worry about whether I should get married or not. We weren't too worried about what Garmale Bande would say or think. Either turn up to the wedding or don't. That's your choice.
Well, it should be. And I see lots of stigma around dates and planning of kind of death anniversaries and should we, shouldn't we? And if somebody passes, should we? One of my friends lost her mum shortly before her wedding and she wanted to change the date because they knew she was unwell. And her mum said, absolutely not. My last wish is that you get married. And she kind of said to, society and externals that I'm doing it anyway. This is what my mother wanted. So I think that's so poignant to mention. Your mother and father better.
Yeah. We live in a very judgmental culture, I think, where people will judge that 6 months after my mum died, I was smiling and happy and celebrating at my wedding. But the wedding was also a huge tribute. We had a video made about my mum. We had I remember my cousins all got together and we released lanterns at one of the functions at home.
So it's an homage to...
It was. My nanny was sitting in my mum's seat. My nanny was still alive. She herself had lost her daughter, her youngest child. My mum was the youngest of 5 siblings. So she'd lost her daughter. So we had her sitting in the seat. So, we made it as much a tribute. But in terms of going back to the compromise, what we then sort of agreed was that we would, me, my dad, my chachi, and a few of other members of our family, and bearing in mind my boy was already in Tanzania, what we had said that we would come to Arusha and do some of the functions there.
Okay.
And then we would come back here and do the Lama and sort of other functions here, which we felt was quite a happy compromise. It suited our family, it suited Jaspreet's family. So we went out there and they were able to do everything they wanted to do to sort of celebrate the wedding, and we had a great time there. And then straight away we came over here and then we did the things that we wanted to do here. So it was a bit of a sort of, compromise wedding.
Compromise and juggling act to get, it all done. But yeah.
Exactly.
I think something I want to hold space for is grief and how you dealt with that. I think there may be some audience members listening in, and me personally, I kind of would like to explore how you dealt with grief and how you deal with grief, because I don't think it's something that's linear. It can strike you down 5 years after the fact, or it can be crippling in the moment. And how did you kind of overcome that? And then the added complexity of a wedding smack bang in the middle of, grief. So what helped you? And what do you think?
I don't know. I get asked this question a lot because I talk about it a lot. So a lot of people ask me, how did you deal with it? How did you get through it? How are you coping now? The truth is, I don't know. There isn't an answer. You can't prepare for things that are of that magnitude, I think. I would never in my wildest dreams have believed that cancer would strike our family in that way, because somebody else always gets cancer. Somebody else always gets it. And you hear about somebody passing from cancer. It's sad. You never ever expect it to be so close to home. My mum was 56 when she died. So, incredibly young. Incredibly young, diagnosed at 54. And so it was just, every day was just, you just get on with it. She was battling away. She was having chemotherapy. She had major debulking surgery. My dad was, getting on with it, doing what he needed to do. I was getting on with it, doing what I needed to do. You just almost run on adrenaline, I think, part of it as well. And, we're trying to plan this wedding as well. So we were trying to keep busy at the same time. But I'm well aware that I had the luxury of being able to walk away as and when I needed to. And I'm aware of that luxury, because if my mum was having down days, I could say, actually, I need to go out, or I need to go and see some friends, or
so that
whatever it might be. And that might come across as selfish, but that is the way I felt that I needed to take care of myself at the time, because I was living, we were living together. I was seeing it every single day. I was waking up seeing it. I was going to sleep thinking it. And so having those moments out to be able to smile and laugh, whilst the guilt was there, because, here I was smiling, laughing, enjoying myself, knowing full well that my mum was at home basically dying. So there was that guilt that I carried as well. But I got to the point of, I was more concerned about how I was feeling and what was right for me than what other people felt that I should be feeling and should be doing. I wasn't too concerned about what other people thought I should be doing, whether they articulated it to me or to others, whatever. I just wanted to do what I felt was right to me. And for my mum, she would encourage me to go out. She would say, what we would just sit, how much can you sit there and cry? How much can you sit there and be down? Her herself, when she could, she would want to go out for walks and those kinds of things. So, and the grief journey, I think, is never ending. It's been 7 years now, over 7 years it's been. And I guess my life has changed so much now. I'm married, I've got 3 children, we're running businesses, we're so busy that thinking about her doesn't hit in the same way perhaps as it would have done 6 years ago, let's say, where, if I thought about her 6 years ago, my whole day would stop and there would be tears. And, now it's a case of I think about her and sometimes I laugh and, we laugh at a memory, or I remind myself that she's not here anymore. But you just get so caught up in life and whatever you're trying to build. I'm trying to build a family, trying to build businesses, that grief, I think, just takes different forms.
Right, yeah.
And in all the work that I do, in the storytelling work that I do, in the sort of work that I do with parents, I never, I keep my mother's legacy alive by always talking about her.
Yeah.
That for me is tribute enough, that actually I don't, because again, in our community, somebody dies, that's it. You just sort of wrap it up, and you don't really address it very much. You don't talk about it very much. You certainly don't talk about it. Yeah. You certainly don't talk about it in public. So I openly talk about what it was like. I openly talk about her struggles, because for me, there's also the piece of, if my story resonates with somebody else or helps somebody else, or if if me talking about my mum's symptoms help another woman look into her own symptoms, then it's a job well done for me.
For sure, you're helping other people.
Absolutely. So I'm constantly all about sharing the stories, sharing those vulnerabilities. I mean, Jasper and I talk about our daughter's health all the time, and the struggles we went through with her, because again, it just might resonate with somebody. And sometimes you just need to hear from people that have walked a similar path.
Of course.
And, have come out on the other end okay-ish, because it makes you realise that there is a light.
Hope.
There is hope, absolutely.
Yeah. Do you think that as a community we need to talk more about cancer? Do you still see that there's that stigma around not discussing illnesses, saying someone's unwell but not going into details? And I also ask this from a medical standpoint, because if we're not talking about it, we're not raising awareness, as you said, and people could be missing signs. I just wanted to ask your thoughts on that.
Yeah, but look, for me, it's a no-brainer. Absolutely, we need to be talking about it more, not just cancer, but any kind of health issues that affect us as humans, but specifically might affect us as Asians or Sikhs or whatever it might be, things like diabetes, heart disease, cholesterol, those kinds of things we need to be talking about more, but cancer definitely. And I think there is this this ridiculous stigma that in a woman, if it's ovarian cancer, oh God, we can't talk about ovaries. How can we talk about, especially your mum's ovaries? How can you talk about your mum's ovaries? Or if it's breast cancer, how can you talk about, I don't know what I can and can't say here, but how can you talk about boobs? It's completely, it's a ridiculous mindset to have, I think, because at the end of the day, every woman's got them.
Isn't an atom in that?
Exactly. And when we talk about men and we talk about prostate cancer, every man's got it. So we can either pretend it doesn't exist and hope for the best. Hope doesn't get us very far. At the end of the day, you need to be talking about your medical conditions. You need to be talking about the symptoms that you might have. You need to be going to see doctors. If you feel more comfortable seeing apne doctors who might speak Panjabi or do Hindi, whatever your language is, do what's right. But at the end of the day, recognise what those symptoms are. And I think these charities, they've got a lot of work to do. And I do some work with a charity called Target Ovarian Cancer. I did a big skydive out of a plane after my mum died, and we raised over £10,000 for them. But my point to them is they need to get into Gurdwara, they need to get into mandirs and mosques, and they need to translate their literature into languages that our people can understand. Because if we're not accessing the communities, then too many of our people are going to die at very young ages because they are not getting seen for things that could be treated.
Yeah, and it's seen as such a taboo topic. And you mentioned breast cancer. I've seen in clinics specifically where you've got those cultural barriers, people don't want to talk about it. Things get ignored. It's an awkward conversation to have. If you're not comfortable discussing these things, you're not going to bring it up, and then sadly diagnoses are missed or treated late. And what does that mean? And I think conversations like this are really important. You sharing and openly talking about your mother's diagnosis, I think shines a light in our community, for sure. Something you touched on, your daughter's kind of health challenges, and I want to set the scene for people listening in, that yourself and Jaspreet became parents, which is a journey in itself. Not only did you become parents, you became parents during the pandemic, and your daughter was born with serious health challenges. So can you just talk us through what the diagnosis was and what that meant for you and Jaspreet?
Yeah, so we, bearing in mind that, my mum had passed, Jaspreet's mum lives in Tanzania, and so, family support was limited in terms of that everyday kind of support that a lot of us need.
I didn't have my mom here. I didn't have my mother-in-law, but his chachi was absolutely amazing. She was really, really helpful during that time.
Our daughter was born a month premature. She was actually due in June. She was born a month premature, and she'd had when she was born, the pediatrician had a little look at her. Her breathing was a little bit funny, but, as first-time parents, we were really conscious, really worried, but told everything was fine. She was breastfed and wasn't feeding very well, didn't latch on very well, was sick quite a bit. And then at her 8-week jabs, so, bearing in mind 8 weeks have passed now, 8-week jabs, we've gone to the GP, and the GP has said that she's got a heart murmur, and he can't jab her. Just go and get the heart murmur checked out. Once the doctors have given it the all clear, come back. Okay, fine, no problem. Went to our local hospital. So now we're sort of pushing in towards that summer of 2020. If you remember, it's that eat out to help out period where we're sort of beginning to open up and spread COVID. And so we went to the local hospital, and anyway, a couple of checks later, suddenly we're told that she's been diagnosed as having been born with 3 holes in her heart. And, we started learning all this, medical jargon. So she was diagnosed with what's called an ASD, ASD, VSD, and PDA is what she had.
All the abbreviations.
All the abbreviations that we knew nothing about, and, suddenly started becoming expert cardiologists through our research, and that she would need to have surgery. And now at this stage, her feeding was very poor. She was underweight. She was sick every time that she was being fed. And so Jaspreet was told that, breastfeeding wasn't going to be an option anymore. She needed to be fed high calorie milk that we were prescribed.
Diets, yeah.
I think it was called Infotrini, and she would have to have it fed through a tube in her nose. So they inserted this tube into her nose, and we would sort of sit there and, watch her being fed that way. She was still being sick. So what was happening was, because the way the heart was pumping her blood, it was not pumping the right blood to the right places. And so when she was suckling, she was actually using more calories than she was gaining from the breast milk. And so she was fed this extra milk. And anyway, we were now under Great Ormond Street's care, which is a catch-22, because if you're under Great Ormond Street's care, you know that you're in the best care in the world.
Yes.
It's world famous as a children's hospital. But on the flip side, if you're under Great Ormond Street's care, you know something serious is wrong with your child. And so we spent then the best part of the next 6 or 7 months in and out of Great Ormond Street. She was booked to have open heart surgery on 2 occasions, which were cancelled last minute. She then on Christmas Day, now if you remember, again, 2020, we're now moving towards this second lockdown, and we were in bubbles. So we had bubbled with my Chacha's family, who lived, not very far from us, and we were going to spend Christmas Day with them. And our daughter was very unwell on Christmas Day, and more unwell than usual. And, they always say use your parental instinct. And we sort of thought, I said to Jaspreet, why don't you take her to A&E? I know it's Christmas Day, I'm really sorry, but maybe just, she was really sick and really lethargic. Went to get her seen. Anyway, they quickly diagnosed her as having a diaphragmatic hernia, which came out of nowhere. So her bowel had perforated through her diaphragm and was pushing up against her lung. Out of the blue. So she was then rushed to Great Ormond Street on Boxing Day to have emergency keyhole surgery to repair the hernia. This was all whilst this heart condition is still going on. So that was our Christmas, her first Christmas, our first Christmas with her. And then we went back to, because I used to work in education, so we went back to school. If you remember, January the first day, everyone went back to school. And then that evening, we were put into a second, the big lockdown again, January 21. Yeah. So now we're in this next big lockdown, and our daughter finally had open heart surgery in February of 2021, where they repaired 2 of the holes, weren't able to repair one, that she still has that hole. And the only time then that I was allowed into Great Ormond Street was when our daughter was in intensive care after surgery.
After the fact.
So we went to see her, this tiny little baby. She was connected to, I'm not exaggerating when I say a dozen tubes, great big gaping
Which
kind
is
of.
so difficult to see.
It was horrible. It was really horrible to see. Massive wound down the middle of her chest. Surgery was about 9 hours.
Oh my God.
So that whole day we were just wandering around. Everything's closed in London.
Just
waiting around, wandering around. We got a call to say surgery successful. You can come and see her. She's in intensive care. She spent a few days in intensive care.
And the relief from...
And then was released. She's still a heart patient now. So she's turning, at the time of recording this episode, she's turning 5 at the end of May. So if you saw her, you'd have no idea.
Yes. Okay.
You had no idea what she's been through. She still is a heart patient. She's got a great big scar down the middle of her chest, which we talk to her a lot about.
Yeah. How does she deal with it?
She knows she had a major operation. She knows something was wrong. She doesn't quite understand what was wrong, but she knows she had a major operation. I guess the reason why we normalize it with her now is because as she gets older and goes through puberty, I think having a scar down the middle of a girl's chest is probably going to play a role on her kind of well-being and how she sees herself. Self-confidence, all of that.
Self-conscious. And I feel like when you're a teenager, and especially as women, sometimes you kind of are more critical, you're self-critical. And I think, those are important conversations. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so we just want to normalize it for her as much as possible. We call it her warrior scar or her battle wound or things like that, just to play into the kind of sick element.
She's a big warrior.
Yes, we sort of try and tell her that. And she, that was a really challenging time. Again, with no family support because it's COVID.
Yeah.
Only a bit of WhatsApp, which I think on the flip side, actually, we were thinking about this a little while ago, might have worked in our favour.
Blessing in a disguise.
Exactly, because as wonderful as our family is, as much as I love my family and Jaspreet loves her family, to not have that intensity of people always around.
And asking you.
Yeah.
You're trying to decipher the diagnosis yourself without having everybody ask you what it means.
Yeah. Being in hospitals and sort of all that, it was always one parent allowed.
Yeah.
And that was very, very tough for me, I think, for sort of Amit, because it was so close to losing his mom. It was very much overwhelming for them. It was very much like, oh gosh, this is really serious, because obviously the worst had happened with their mom. And for me, I was trying to be a bit more optimistic, and I was like, this is sort of, it happens, children are born with it, they can sort of she can have surgery and she'll be fine. And I had a very sort of optimistic view on it, and that's where we would clash sometimes.
It had a massive impact on our relationship because I would expect questions to be asked. She wouldn't have asked them. She's listening to all this heavy medical stuff and I'm not there. And it was just putting this strain on. I would try and dial in. I would walk around London deserted, trying to get information.
When I used to sit with the doctors and the consultant, and they're sort of explaining, they got using medical terms and all of that. And I wouldn't really question, I was like, I'm sitting next to an expert. So, obviously they're telling me she's going to be fine. She's got this. We need surgery to correct it. When that surgery happens, we don't know, but she's got to do X, Y, and Z before that. And I'd very much be like, okay, yes, yeah, fine. We would try to dial him in but the reception in hospitals are so, bad. He would hardly be able to hear anything. And then I would come home and he would tell me, okay, so what did they say? And to be honest, from the time of sitting with the consultant and actually going home, I'd forget half the things. Because sometimes when I'm talking to the consultant, I'd be feeding her or I'd be doing something. My mind would be, in different places. And he'd be like, well, did you ask this? Did you ask what risk factors? What if this happens to her? What if, she can't do this or she can't do that? And I'd be like, I didn't ask those questions. Why didn't you ask those questions? Yeah. You should have asked those questions. And that was, very, very difficult between us. Also, I think there were so many times in hospital, it's very lonely. And, hospitals are, it's not so straightforward that you go in your appointment's at 11 o'clock, you're going to be seen at 11 o'clock and you come out.
A lot of waiting.
There's a lot of waiting, and you're with a newborn. Sometimes you've got to change the nappy, you've got to do feeds in between, you're pushing a pushchair up and down lifts, sometimes the stairs, and also sitting there on your own, being sort of first-time parent and listening, about your child. Sometimes you want your partner there. You just want them to hold your hand. Moral support. Yes, for sure. Or, you just want somebody to take off the load. Like sometimes I'd be carrying her the whole day or soothing her because they've pricked her, because they've, need blood samples or something. She's really unsettled. And you need somebody to share that load. Like somebody I can at least pass on to that. Here, you look at 5 minutes. Just go grab a coffee.
Just a 2 minute.
Yeah, I need to go grab a coffee.
We were really struggling. I was still very much on the grief journey. The hard part for us, I think, was us not being able to be together with the consultants and listening to all the things they were saying, because neither of us are medics. Neither of us know this terminology. The questions that I have might be different to the questions Jaspreet has. I might remember something that she does, and she might remember something that I don't. But because we're not there together, and you try and dial in, but no hospital has any signals. It did put a strain on the marriage, because we would argue a lot about what we thought the right course of action was based on our limited knowledge of medicine and based on our varied interaction with people who are involved in medicine and the consultants who I never got to meet. And I felt a little bit, I guess to be brutally honest now, I think I felt a little bit envious of the fact that Jaspreet was able to, and that was a choice we made, by the way. It was a choice that Jaspreet would go in because we just felt that our daughter would be more comforted having her mum with her than me. But I felt envious that, you know, you were getting to listen to all this terminology and you were getting to ask all the questions and I had to just walk around. But then she would argue she was envious of the fact that I didn't have to do any of the heavy lifting in terms of the medical stuff. And that would put a strain on us as to who has it easier or, you know, who has it better. I guess just the fact that we were isolated and we were on our own probably helped us because we realised that we've got nobody else. You know, her parents are not in this country. My mum's not alive. My dad was around, obviously. But we had to just crack on and deal with it. And you either deal with it together or you continue arguing, you continue struggling. But at the end of the day, we realised that every time we looked at our daughter, this human being depended on us and needed us to be united.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
I very much so, I think, tried to put myself in his shoes sometimes, and I thought he's just lost his mum, and obviously for him it's taken, the medical side's taken, you know, a toll. Different side is he's actually seeing, you know, the worst side of it. That
worst case.
Worst case. He always, you know, it was, and I used to always think to myself, why are you thinking so negatively? You know, it's going to be okay. You know, it's going to be fine. It's going to be okay, and we're sort of going to get through this. And I think we sort of just, and I think maybe also managed it in a sense of way that actually we didn't see each other, because obviously we'd constantly be on sort of message, but I think physically, because I was in hospital, he was not in hospital, it was, you know, just sort of managed that way. When we look back now, I think, you know, we always ask ourselves, I don't think we followed a certain technique. I think maybe just personalities came into play. I just sort of, you know, I was just very calm with him. You know, I didn't tell him, well, I'm doing XYZ and you're not, and, you know, you don't know what it feels like. And we didn't necessarily...
Empathy and compassion.
Yes. Yeah. You know, just empathy and compassion in that sense. And I think he sort of realized as well that, you know, it's not easy. He didn't actually see her go through all of that, what I saw. Like sometimes you can try to explain to somebody that, oh, they're pricking her feet 5 times or they're pricking her here because they can't find enough. But actually sit through that when she's crying her eyes out. It's really hard because they have to get her blood some, but they can't find a nerve.
Yeah, and she doesn't understand.
She doesn't understand what's going on.
It's intense.
It's intense.
To ask about, you know, balancing household chores, so your business priorities and your household priorities, and how do you both navigate that? Because that can be intense. Romantic partners and business partners.
It is intense as the word. It is very intense. It is very intense. And I think, like I told you, I mean, you know, we've gone through it all. I think, you know, we've gone through the like lows, we've gone through the highs, we've gone through the arguments, you know, we still have them. But we go by day now. And, you know, some days don't go as we plan.
Yeah.
You know, they don't go. And sometimes at the end of the day, we're not happy about it. But we also equally know that we got to be kind to ourselves. I think in the beginning, I wasn't much so. I used to take it very hard on myself because I used to sort of think that, you know, I should be able to do it. I was told, you know, I was like, you have to force time out for yourself. Otherwise, you're going to go mad. Even if it's an hour or 2 hours in a week, just you go for a walk or do something. And I really try, because if I do that, I'm okay. The times I don't do it, like if I go a week without getting any me time, by the end of the week, I'm so cranky, so ratty, and that's when the arguments start.
Because you're irritable.
Very much. And I'm very much so, yeah, well, you went to the gym twice this week. Well, you've played golf.
I don't know, something a comparison of very... So. No, but that's really important. Because I think that me time, it keeps you sane.
It does. It's okay to go at your own pace. It's okay if one day doesn't go how you want it to go, or a month doesn't go how you want it to go. You can't sugarcoat it that, you know, we're running a business together, we're a really happy couple, and, you know, we're managing family and business perfectly.
Yeah, nothing's perfect. And I think that's what we want to talk about. We want to say that, you know, real love isn't perfect, or marriage isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about building something.
Correct. We communicate quite well. I think that's the only thing I think.
That's a communication.
Yeah, and I think
because I'm so methodical, if we have an argument, and it, you know, the classic kind of couple, it might be a day or two where you're not talking and we're just pottering around the house and you're trying to ignore each other, waiting for the other one to sort of cave in. But for me, it's very much, you know, once we have a conversation, we need to sit down and talk through what happened and why it happened. We don't brush things under the carpet,
which is important.
Yeah,
for us, it's very important because we've got 3 kids, we've got a business. We as I say, our lives are so intertwined. So for us, it's okay. We fell out over this. It might be a genuine reason, or it might be a trivial reason, but we need to sit down and talk about it.
Yeah,
and then we move forward. So I think for me, communication is a very, very important kind of way of maintaining that relationship, because I need to hear when I've done something wrong, and I need to hear when I've not behaved in the right way, and in the same way I need to also be able to explain when I feel that Jaspreet's done something wrong, and
Like give each other that feedback.
yeah, absolutely. And yeah,
Which I think he takes much better than I do, to be honest. I don't like being told.
So you take feedback. Well,
great. I'm not great at being criticized. I think one of the things about ADHD is when you get criticized, even if it's constructive, your immediate response is to be very defensive. So my immediate response is say absolutely not. But then within seconds of thinking about it, it's sort of...
yeah, the diagnosis of ADHD as an adult.
Yeah, I mean, it's very, very difficult to explain kind of neurodivergent conditions to somebody who doesn't understand them, because you can't see anything. So when you say to somebody you've got a disability or you've got you're neurodivergent, it's hard to say what that looks like.
Visible.
It's not visible, right? You know, other disabilities that are visible, you can understand. So this is all about, I guess the best way for me to explain it is to say certain things that I do. But the worry about that is then other people say, oh, I do that. That's just quite normal, and it trivializes.
Yeah,
it trivializes ADHD. So I'm really wary about sort of explaining exactly what it is. The best thing is for people to sort of look it up and understand what it does, because you may well have those traits and you may well be neurodivergent yourself. But in our community, very few people that I know of that actually go ahead and get diagnosed. And the only reason I did it was because I worked in education for 10 years. Yeah, and I worked with children that were ADHD that had all sorts of other, on the spectrum in all sorts of other ways. And I started recognizing some of their behaviors in me as an adult. I couldn't sit in meetings and concentrate. I couldn't sit in and listen to talks without going mad and needing to walk out, fidgeting all the time, zoning out, interrupting people, and people thinking that I was being rude when I wasn't trying to be rude. I just had this impulsivity to interrupt. And so I decided then a couple of years ago, I think it was now, that, I want to get that diagnosis, because would it make a difference to my life? I don't know. But I wanted to know if I had this condition, partly because it would be a justification to people that I've worked with and interacted with, that, this is why I am the way that I am.
Make sense of it.
Yeah, exactly. And also it was validation for me to understand that, some of the things that I do aren't necessarily because I'm a bad person. I just can't help it. I have this condition that makes it difficult for me to behave in typical ways. And I think Jaspreet's maybe found it a little bit hard to deal with that, because I do have these traits which are, I can imagine, being quite difficult to deal with and live with. But every time she tells me off for something, I'll always say to her, you're not being very inclusive right now. Because,
you get she's version card.
She's not understanding that I'm behaving that way potentially because of no, I'm joking. I don't want to trivialize it, of course. But there are times where I think Jaspreet doesn't understand.
So I wanted to talk about kind of ADHD, but experiencing it as a partner. Somebody you love has ADHD and what that looks like.
Yeah, to be honest, I didn't know what ADHD was. It's not a term that I've come across. So, I've grown up knowing ADHD or, autism or anything like that. I think we're very much so. We don't know what they are. And obviously there's a lot of spectrums as well. And I heard it from him. And, when he would argue and stuff, he'd be like, this is my ADHD. And I'd be like, that's just an excuse. But yes, and then obviously, we've been talking about it for a while, and he was like, I want to get diagnosed, and I was like, yeah, go ahead. So, he got diagnosed, and then afterwards he was like, you have to read up on it, and I did. I think, I did a bit of reading on it, and I understand it a lot more now. And like he says, sometimes, when you argue, he'd be like, you're not being very inclusive. At the time, I was like, and there are times now which, I understand why he does things, and I understand that, he's being snappy. And sometimes if he's, tells me that I can't do this, when the kids are, sort of, there's loads going on and there's chaos everywhere, he tells me overstimulating, then I think before I used to be, well, tough, they're your kids too. Now I'm like, okay, fine. If you need to step out, then step out, and then come when you're sort of, a bit calmed down and everything. So I think we're sort of getting there, slowly. It is still very hard for me. I think it's hard because of the situation we're in. We've got 3 very young kids. We're trying to run a business together. So at the moment, there's a lot going on in life, generally for us. And then obviously, I think if we very much so, had a very smooth life, then it'd be like, oh, yes, I'd be like, every time it gets angry, I'd be like, okay, yes, I'm very inclusive. You just calm down. But I think because myself, I am. Yes, because myself, I'm so stimulated. It's hard to understand, but I do try. Yeah, I do try. Yeah.
And I guess because this was an adult diagnosis, what would your thoughts be on, dating with neurodivergent, individuals or mental health? So it's a hard question because I'm trying to say, if you knew he had ADHD when you were dating, like would that have impacted how do you think you would have dealt with that? Because I think we're seeing more and more, people coming on board with this and what that means for dating. How do you communicate that to somebody, you're dating?
To be honest, I think, it would play a part. Like, if you think that somebody, because especially if you don't know them, so you then try to make an image of them yourself. Because, if you told me like a date, in a date or two that, I've got ADHD, I've gone up and read up on it, and stuff that you read on the internet is always, there's always extreme cases. It's not about like, inclusive for life, be like, oh gosh, I can't get married to this guy who's so impulsive, who's based off of what the internet is saying. I would make my own judgment based on, what they're saying because I don't know him. So I do think if you bring that sort of in sort of a dating perspective, it would be tough, especially if you're dating somebody. I mean, him might be a bit different because he came, through family, and family could say, well, no, he's not like that, or, he is a nice guy, or, you've got somebody, reassurance. I think we all need a bit of reassurance. And when you're dating somebody who's a stranger and you don't have any reassurance, it could be difficult. But at the same time, I personally would appreciate the honesty. Yeah. Like I'd appreciate somebody telling me rather than finding out much later or, down. I think I would much prefer the honesty. Like he said, it's nothing physical. So it's very different. Like him having ADHD to somebody else having ADHD could be totally different because it could be on a different spectrum, or, autism as well is a different spectrum. So I would say not to just judge and not to, be too quick. I think sometimes we can be too quick to make assumptions. Yes. Yeah.
Is there a stigma around it in our community?
Yeah, is there stigma around kind of neurodivergence? And we know mental health, but like with neurodivergence, is the lack of understanding around it and then perhaps stigma attached?
I think there is a great stigma actually around neurodivergent, neurodiversity in general. But I think that goes beyond people thinking it's a bad thing and more about people in our community just not knowing what it is. Right. I don't know how many seniors, especially those who don't speak English and don't, because when I was talking to somebody about neurodiversity, they asked me to come to a Gurdwara and do a talk, and I said, with pleasure. And then, I'm a fluent Panjabi speaker, but I don't know how to say neurodiversity in Punjabi. I don't know how to say a certain terminology that we use. Either it's a word that is so infrequently used, I don't know what it is, or the word doesn't actually exist. And so how do you translate in Panjabi, or you think of other languages, Hindi, Urdu, Bengali, whatever, how do you translate conditions that are about our brain and are about, neurodivergent conditions? How do you talk about those things when the words don't exist?
That's such a brilliant point because, as a former healthcare professional, as someone who's an advocate for this, I've not thought about that until this conversation. When we talk about kind of language and explaining what that means to people in our community who English may not be their first language, right? We can, in the medical field, we can speak about the heart, the lungs, and there's ways around, that barrier. But how do we navigate the language barrier for things like, neurodiversity?
Exactly. Because the issue is you're talking about something that already is difficult for people to understand. Yes. Like I say, even talking to people in English about ADHD, because you can't see it, it's difficult for people to understand what it is and how it impacts you. To then take that same difficulty and to talk to somebody in Punjabi about what it might be is almost impossible. So I've been in some conversations with some of these ADHD charities about actually their literature needs to be translated by professional translators into, and I've seen on Instagram there is somebody I think that does something about autism in Sikhi and Sikh autism, who really explains it quite beautifully in Panjabi, what autism looks like and what it means. Because I think if we're going to smash these stigmas, of which there are many, the only way to do it is through explanation, through creating content that people can consume and can watch, through charities sending literature out in languages other than just English for that generation that can't. Or even for our generation that maybe have come over from India or wherever and English is not their first language. So I think we've got to do a lot more around breaking that stigma. But to the original question of asking whether there is a stigma, absolutely there is. I see it, I feel it all the time. And I feel like I'm constantly having to explain myself,
Which is so tough.
explain my identity, explain what the ADHD means to people who ultimately don't care.
Yeah.
Because they don't believe in it. They don't accept that it's a real issue, even though, there is you're protected under the Equalities Act as a it is seen as a disability.
Yeah. Legislation supports
exactly.
it. Yeah,
but
community.
up and they won't see it as a legitimate condition because they can't see anything. And when you talk about what it is, they're like, yeah, everyone's got that.
Yeah.
What's so special about you?
Of, I have a stressful day and I feel overstimulated. And it's a lot more than that, and it can be debilitating. And I think just to touch on, ADHD, special education needs and your work, because I know you were in the education field too. And we're seeing more and more misdiagnoses, right? Or late diagnoses. And what that means for children who are then lost in the system with labels like lazy, complacent, or uninterested, when actually they just haven't got the diagnosis. So does that come up in your work, and have you seen that?
Not so much now, because I don't work in education anymore, and I'm not really working with children directly in the same way that I was before. But I think one of the issues that I found when I was in education was that a lot of parents were unwilling to have their children labelled. And there was this fear of, if my child gets labelled as autistic, if my child... And I was talking to people in various cultures, including our own, and it comes down to, if my child is autistic, how am I going to get him married or her married?
Oh, wow.
There was that conversation that some people were having directly with me.
So
that,
it back to the marriage.
Yeah, that my child is only 14 or 15 now, but if how am I going to get an autistic child married? Who's going to want to marry an autistic person? And you have to try and deal with those kind of nonsensical views was challenging. And the way I used to phrase it to parents, whatever culture they were from, that, okay, you're scared of the label. I get that. There are legitimate reasons to worry about your child being labelled with whatever condition it might be. But the alternative is that your child is already being labelled. His peers or her peers have already labelled your child as weird, as strange, as an odd job, as stupid,
Not paying attention.
as peers don't use nice words. They call each other weirdos. So would you rather your child understand why they behave the way that they do, and then be able to articulate that to their peers, so the peers understand that I'm just a bit different if I'm autistic, or if I've got ADHD, or if I'm whatever it is, I'm just a bit different. I see things differently. I might respond to you differently. I might not get your social cues or whatever. Or do you want your child to be labelled that weirdo who has no friends because he doesn't get any of the jokes and doesn't laugh? So I was always encouraging parents that if you genuinely believe that there is a neurodivergent condition that your child might have, pursue the diagnosis, because you will replace the horrible labels of weirdo and so on with legitimate labels that actually, young people, all right, they're not the most understanding people in the world, and the playground can be pretty horrible at times. But if young people know that their friend is autistic and therefore doesn't understand things in the same way, or doesn't see things in the same way, young people can demonstrate empathy.
They do.
And, they can show compassion.
Sure. Did you struggle we've spoken about stigma, but did you struggle to tell extended family members or people that, okay, this is what I have, or was it seem?
No, I didn't struggle at all. The issue was that nobody cared because nobody knew anything about it. That's the bottom line. So when I told people about it, it was a case of, oh, okay, I don't know what difference that makes to you or to me. But
there's that awareness piece.
Yeah, there was almost a non-existent kind of response to it, because the people in my generation, my cousins and whatever it might be, not really that bothered, because it is what it is. The older generation, no idea what ADHD is, so they're none the wiser as to what it is that I might be talking about. But I write about it and speak about it, and it's part of my story, it's part of my identity, it's part of who I am. And again, it goes back to that, if it resonates, if somebody that looks like me,
which is, it representation matters, because you're not just somebody with a diagnosis of adult ADHD. You're a thing, you're in our community. And I think once you see, if you just help one person, listening to your story, and they're like, actually, this really resonates with me, I think that's what matters.
Absolutely.
So I know we've touched on kind of neurodivergence and your ADHD diagnosis. I wanted to talk about kind of linking this to marriage. So in our community, we often see kind of mental health issues and marriage seen as a solution, perhaps, for this, and what those look like. We see instances of, you're not dealing well with something, so you turn to alcohol or other vices. And the solution by family members or society is, well, if you just get married, that will solve the problem. What are your thoughts on that?
We're just obsessed with my kids have to
It's
get
what
married.
success looks like. Marriage,
And
children.
if my son drinks too much, or my son parties too much, or my son takes drugs or whatever, the only way to sort him out is to get him married. And the truth is, it was usually the women that suffer.
Yes.
Actually, it wasn't often, if you think about what happened in days gone by, it was usually boys that were out of control, drinking too much, partying too much, enjoying themselves too much, wrapped up in living a great life.
Or if boys who had a disability.
Or boys that had disabilities, or whatever. And it was a case of the only way to solve this issue is to get him married. That's what they use. That's what they say, don't they? Get them married off. A woman will sort him out, and we won't say anything about whether it's a disability, whether it's a mental health condition, whether it's drinking, drug, gambling problem, whatever it might be. And with the expectation that getting them married means that everything will be okay. We know that in the majority of cases, in the olden days, the woman often didn't have a choice. They had to stick out the marriage because divorce in our culture was
taboo.
Absolute no.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, it's, women are taking much more of a stand, and it's a case of, no, thank you. This is not for me. We're obsessed in our culture with marriage. We're just absolutely obsessed with this idea that once you have a child, if you've got a daughter, for example, which is why some people still have this ridiculous view of if they have a daughter, it's bad news. Yeah, because she's going to cost me money. I've got to prepare for the wedding and dowries and all this nonsense. We've got this obsessive idea that when we have kids, the only priority in life we've got now is to get them married. But so many people in our culture now, of our generation, the next generation, are not interested in marriage.
They've seen a result of their parents' marriages, or their, somebody they know in their family, and they get.
And then, I know people that just go off traveling and I want to explore the world, and business are used. I wanted to touch on, you've gone through grief and you've gone through something really difficult, and mental health and Jaspreet as well, being a mum and navigating those challenges. What were your tools for coping? Because we see so easily with grief, alcohol or medication, self-medicating, and you didn't turn to that. So I think I just wanted to get your thoughts on how you coped. I know it's a pretty loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't lie about the fact that I like to have a drink. That's my choice. That's who I am. I don't know if I drank any more because my mum was unwell. I definitely was much more open-minded to things like therapy, and I did have therapy during more so after my mum had passed.
Right.
I think dealing with that, because it opened up a lot of issues. I think it opened up a lot of struggles, especially with my dad, and lots of other kind of bits that I felt needed processing, and it was impacting the marriage, which was new. And so therapy for me was a big thing. I know there's still a stigma around that, especially Asian men who don't like to talk about how they're feeling, who don't like to, there's a certain definition of masculinity in our culture, and if we don't adhere to that definition, we are somehow weak. My view very much is that vulnerability is not a weakness. Actually, vulnerability is a strength if you're able to deal with it. Because when you're vulnerable, it's not just you're impacting those around you that matter most to you. In my case, my wife, my children. So if I'm not showing up as the best version of myself, I'm less concerned about the impact it's having on me, and more concerned about the impact it's having on those that rely on me and those that need me. And so for me, therapy was a big thing. As I'm sure you can tell, talking is not an issue for me. Talking about how I'm feeling is not an issue for me. I was very okay with talking to a stranger about how I was feeling, because that stranger was then helping me process the kind of grief journey that I was on, and the things that were coming out of that. So that was my process.
And I think our marriage played a part in it, because it was so close. So I think you just sort of got yourself involved with, this is my new life. I want to just
in time
build in the timeline perspective, because obviously, your mum passed away, and then so 6 months afterwards we got married. So all of a sudden, we had this new life, where it was me and him, and, we did quite a lot in our first year, sort of, in terms of, we went away on quite a few holidays, because we sort of knew that, once we start having children, that would sort of be, less so. So we packed in quite a lot, I think, afterwards, even much more so for us in our first year of marriage. We packed quite a lot in, and then obviously very much soon after we had our daughter. So I think sometimes I feel for him, it was very much so that, he just had to get on with life. And in a good way or in a bad way, yeah, kept busy, yes. And I think that's one good thing he did was he kept himself quite busy. And I think for other people, much so, who don't keep themselves busy, that's when it gets quite difficult because you got so much time to think. Yeah, you have loads and loads of time to think.
And then you turn to those other things. Whereas for you both, it sounds like it was just go, go, go. And you kind of...
I think that's the way I operate. I think I'm very much go, go, go when I need to be. Very intense when I need to be. And that probably, if anything, got me through certainly the most difficult of days. There are still difficult days that occur, but they occur less so than they did in those first few years after I'd lost my mum. And I think, it was just for me, keep busy. We got married, we had children, it's busy, 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 building a new life. But at the same time, honouring my mum's legacy and honouring the important role that she played in my life. Well, the role of giving me life, firstly. And talking about her as we're doing now, for me, is a way of keeping her legacy alive.
Yeah, we've spoken at length about everything else, but I wanted to talk about the businesses. So can you talk me through Mixala Chai, how that came about, and then we move on to kind of for working parents. So Mixala Chai.
I think with Mixala, I've always wanted to do something for myself. I think, from a very sort of young age. And I always had it in my mind that I couldn't do something by myself. I always thought I need to find a partner, I need to have a business partner, and, so forth. And then obviously sort of the 9 to 5, and, when you're having conversations with your friends, everyone's like, I want to get away from this 9 to 5. This is not the life I'm for, and I want to build something for myself. We all say it.
Yeah.
We all sort of say it. But I never really sort of followed through. I never really had a solid idea. And I think that's down to sort of my personality as well. I was just very much so, yes, I'm, talking about it, but I wasn't really doing much. And then Amit left his job and sort of started doing, I think seeing him was one of the factors, sort of, just quitting his job and sort of starting something for himself. And then when he quit his job, we started spending a lot of time together. We would go on walks together, and we would just constantly talk about it, constantly talk about doing something, starting something. And then he's the one who told me, well, you always talk about it, but, what are you going to do? You never do it. Yeah. What is your idea? And then when I was on maternity leave with my the second one, and he was like, well, now's the time, you're on maternity leave, you got to think. And literally it was as much as like, have you thought of something? It was constantly on my case. And at times I had to think, what? But then I finally, I thought, okay, what do I do? And then so idea came around about, you have so many flavors of coffee. You got all these like vanilla, hazelnut, and all these flavors of coffee. And what if we do something with Indian tea? What if you blend the spices that you get in a traditional Indian tea with more Western flavors? So it was around about creating like a fusion. It was not something to, play on the traditional bit or anything, but it was more around taking like what I've grown up. So I've always grown up drinking sort of, Indian tea. We've all grown up, that's what, brings it together. When you're together, you have a cup of Indian tea. And that's what the idea, and then we tried to blend it at home. And it wasn't working out because, it was very difficult. And then, we got in touch with one of his friends, and he was like, well, you do know there's a blending company, there's tea blending companies around that can blend it for you. And then we got in touch with them, and we sort of gave them a brief about what we wanted, what ingredients we wanted, and the flavors we wanted. We got a whole range of flavors made. And it was just, it just sort of evolved. And then, we had sort of 15 flavors. We had a focus group. We narrowed down to 4. And it just sort of, I think we just kept on going, just kept on, okay, the next stage was, branding and launching. And then when you start seeing it coming to life, I think it also gives you the drive to keep on going.
Yeah.
And then obviously, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of like imposter syndrome. And we still sometimes think that, what are family going to think? What are friends going to think? What if we don't make it? What if, is our product good enough? Is it, and then you go through this, and then somebody writes you a review, or somebody tastes it, or somebody places like a big order, and you're like, maybe, we do have something that people enjoy.
Little wins.
Little wins, yes. And for a small business, any little win is huge. And even now, when somebody writes us a review, or we see a repeat order, it's like, wow, kind of makes our day. Yes, it is.
So,
but that's how the whole idea of Mixala was sort of born. But we're pretty determined. We're pretty motivated to sort of, keep it going. Yeah, we would.
Plus, I think it is different because we don't see these flavors that you see, and I'll be ordering some.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're just trying to do something different. Yeah, and it's not your traditional where you brew. You can brew them, but it's sort of like tea bag tea. So you can just add your hot water and yes, and
convenience too, because when you're in the office or you're working, just want to quick. Don't have time to go and the jar on, you know. Can I talk about for working parents, how that came about, and what you see day to day with your work in that field?
Yeah, so I left education. I was a deputy head teacher in a secondary school in East London and left in April 2022 without a plan. ADHD. Just quit my job. Just said to Jaspreet, I'm done. Wow. You know, I'm mentally not in the right place. Brave and stupid at the same time, I think, because you know to forego a salary without a plan, and so eventually wound up setting up this business, tried a few different things, a bit of consultancy, a bit of whatever, and then eventually set this business up for working parents, focused on parenting in general and supporting parents, because when I was in education, I saw just how much of a gap there is between parents and children today because of things like social media and tech and games and all those things. More recently, focusing specifically on that social media kind of digital life that our children live and how parents really struggle with it. And you know, happened to create a periodic table of emojis a little while ago, which basically was in response to the program Adolescence. So created this periodic table of emojis, which just showed sort of lots of emojis that children might use and subgroups and subcultures might use to represent sinister meanings. And that table just went viral. It went globally viral. I had no idea when I hit the post button where that table would go, and it just went globally viral. I mean, I was getting requests and media requests from Australia, from Canada, from Latin America, South America, India. It was just
international.
Phenomenal response to it. Most of it positive and thankful, some of it very negative, but that's when you go viral, that's the nature of the beast. So since then, it's been very much focused on supporting organisations being more inclusive to their parents and carers by putting on workshops, training, webinars all around what digital parenting looks like and why we as parents need to, and I genuinely believe this, keep our children off social media, keep devices away from our children for as long as possible. None of our children have devices, and they're not going to for as long as we possibly can do it. 16 to 18 if we can. No social media. But those parents that have given devices and have got social media, it's equally important for them to be aware of the dangers that are out there. The online world, 100%, the online world, as far as I'm concerned, is more dangerous than the physical world. What goes on online that you just don't know about is far more dangerous to your child than what goes on out in the physical world. And my job is to sort of, you know, make parents more aware of that so they can make informed decisions.
Yeah, I don't want to focus on the negative, but I'm just curious because my brain can't compute the periodic table of emojis, how that would receive negative feedback. So can you just give me an example?
Yeah, so that table was based on lots of research I had done on what subgroups and subcultures are using emojis and acronyms for. And I put it all together in one piece. Basically, the negative feedback was either from children themselves who said that I was lying, making it up, these emojis don't exist, or from people, adults, who, again, were saying that I was lying and these emojis don't exist and I'm scaring people and, you know, a fraud and whatever. And I guess the idea is, it is strange because when somebody tells you something that you didn't know, your first response shouldn't be to say that's a lie. Your first response should be to say, oh, that's interesting. You're trying to increase my knowledge. Let me look into it myself and see the extent to which this is true.
Yeah.
But the social media, the internet does crazy things to funny things to people. And just lots of people coming out saying this is a lie.
Very wild social media. But I think it's phenomenal work. And
thank you.
Because, And do you find that when you speak to parents, has anybody given you active examples of where they've used it since or that... Yeah,
so I've been tagged in some social media posts of organizations across the country, across the world, who sort of blew it up into A2 size, covered up the words and gave their staff the words, and you had to match the emoji to the right use. It's phenomenal to see. That was, never did I think it would sort of get to that reach. So it's phenomenal to see. There's a lot of work that's come out of it, which is nice, obviously. It's I want to be a change maker and I want to have a positive impact, but at the same time, I've got a family to feed and I've got to make this a functioning business.
Yeah.
And there's no shame in sort of admitting to that. But work has come out of that, which is good. Organizations that want to be forward looking and outward facing and want to support their parents and carers, schools and colleges that recognize the need to support their parents and carers, and working with individual parents as well.
And so this was off the back of you watching Adolescence?
The work in the business has been around for about 2 years, but watching Adolescence, I thought, this is exactly what I've been talking about. Parents so out of their depth, no idea what's actually going on in their child's online world. And so created this table. It was actually a friend of mine who told me to create a visual, because I created a document, and he was like, turn it into a visual.
Yeah.
So actually credit should go to him for this. But I spent hours putting it together, sent it out there, and it just, the rest is history.
Yeah. Well done. That's
Thank you.
Incredible work. Yeah. We wanted to do a quick fire round of questions. And some of them are loaded, so not to put you on the spot, but here we go. So when did you both know each other was the one?
That date we went to at the Cuban place in Waterloo, remember?
Yes.
I can't remember what date it was, but I told Jaspreet that she was going to marry me.
And I thought that was so arrogant. I left there thinking, who does this guy think he is? So wrong, actually. I thought, who does he think he is? And you ended up getting married.
We did. Exactly.
We did.
So that's when I knew.
I think for me, like I mentioned, I think when things were really difficult and we were going through a very difficult time, and there was a moment, where he didn't give up. And I remember him, telling me that, he loves me. And, I think that was for me really stood out, because I think, like I said before, we sometimes end up just giving up. But the fact that we didn't, I think that was a
turning point for you. Okay. And who is the least organized in the household?
Me.
Definitely you.
And so most organized?
Most organized, I think, would be me.
I think most organized in terms of when it comes to sort of like work and that sort of related. But I think when it comes to the kids and all that, I think that comes to me no matter how I do it. But the responsibility is on me to get the bag packed and, every little thing that comes together with looking after kids. Yeah.
And I suppose this goes hand in hand, but who's the bossiest out of you two?
Him, definitely.
You say that, I might come across as bossy.
But
I think you're pretty bossy, actually. I think I get told what to do a lot of the times.
True, yeah. First so now. Yeah, much more now, especially with the kids, yeah.
That's so interesting. When you have arguments, who is the first to apologize or try and dissolve the situation, diffuse the situation?
I think we're pretty good at knowing, like if it's an argument and we know that we were at fault or we said something, I think we're pretty good. That's the person who then first comes up.
Yeah. Who thinks they made the error in judgment.
Which is usually me. So it's usually, in answer to your question, it's usually me that's the first one to break the ice.
So thank you both for being so open with your story and no holds barred. You've been transparent with everything. I know this will resonate with people listening in, and it certainly has resonated with me. If anyone wants to learn more, check out Mixala Chai, and for working parents, I think links will be in the description. But I think the overall resounding theme is staying true to yourself, and also remembering that real love isn't perfect, but it's about putting in the work. And thank you so much for being here and sharing your story. You and Jaspreet, we appreciate it.